December 19th, 1944, Verdun, France. A bitter wind cut through the stone corridors of the Allied headquarters. Inside, 16 senior commanders sat huddled in heavy coats, gloves tight around frozen fingers, staring at the maps spread across the table. The Battle of the Bulge was raging 50 miles north, the largest battle ever fought by the United States Army. On the maps, red arrows of German advance slashed through the Ardennes, crushing inexperienced American units in their path. Bastogne, a small crossroads town, was surrounded. The 101st Airborne, cut off, outnumbered, and nearly out of ammunition, held the last hope of slowing the German advance. Every hour that passed meant more lives lost, more ground surrendered, more momentum given to Hitler's offensive. Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower broke the silence. How soon can we launch a counterattack? Montgomery leaned back and gave his cautious estimate. 1 week. Other generals suggested 10 days. The room stiffened, the weight of the questions settling over every man. The Allies needed action, and every moment of delay strengthened the enemy. Then George Patton stood. He did not hesitate. His voice cut through the cold and tension, clear and confident. I can attack north with 3 divisions in 48 hours. The room froze. Chairs creaked. Eyebrows shot up. British generals rolled their eyes. Even Bradley turned toward Patton slowly, studying the man he had known for decades. He could not believe what he was hearing. Patton was facing east, preparing a breakthrough into Germany. To turn an entire army 250,000 strong 90 degrees in the dead of winter and attack uphill against the enemy was madness. And yet 7 days later, Patton's tanks would smash through to Bastogne, and General Omar Bradley would say words he would never forget. This is that story. The night of December 18, 1944, had already settled over Luxembourg City, but inside the dimly lit 12th Army Group headquarters, Lieutenant General Omar Nelson Bradley could feel the weight of the war pressing down on him. He hunched over reconnaissance reports, maps, and intercepted German communications, trying to make sense of a situation that seemed to worsen by the hour. For months, Allied intelligence had assured him that the Ardennes forest was impassable for a major German attack. Thick trees, narrow roads, harsh winter terrain. It was supposed to be a quiet sector, ideal for inexperienced divisions to gain rest and experience. But those assurances were now shattered. German forces had struck with staggering speed, more than 200,000 soldiers, nearly 1,000 tanks, and hundreds of artillery pieces breaking through lines that Bradley had trusted to hold. Entire American divisions had disintegrated under the attack. Others fought desperately while retreating westward, and communication lines were in chaos. Bradley exhaled and picked up the field phone. Only one man could respond quickly enough, General George S. Patton. Patton answered immediately, his voice brimming with the energy and confidence that had carried the Third Army across France. Brad, I've got a bridgehead across the Saar. We're ready to move into Germany, he said. But Bradley quickly interrupted, detailing the German offensive in the Ardennes, the scattered units, and the dire situation forming around Bastogne. He pressed Patton to send the 10th Armoured Division north immediately and to prepare for an emergency meeting at Verdun in the morning. Patton bristled at first. Diverting forces north meant abandoning the breakthroughs his army had fought for weeks to achieve. Yet he knew Bradley's tone left no room for argument. After hanging up, Patton's mind raced. His intelligence officer, Colonel Oskar Koch, had warned of unusual German build-ups opposite the Ardennes, but Patton had dismissed the concerns, focused on his eastern push. Now, Koch's warnings made sense. The Germans were attempting a major offensive, and Bastogne was at its center. Patton summoned his staff. The Third Army has to turn north, he said, and we must do it now. His officers stared at him, realizing the enormity of the task. The entire army faced east, prepared for a breakthrough into Germany. Pivoting north meant rerouting 250,000 soldiers, tens of thousands of vehicles, and mountains of supplies along icy narrow roads. Artillery, fuel trucks, and engineers had to be repositioned while maintaining combat effectiveness. Start planning 3 options, Patton commanded. An attack north with 3 divisions, 4 divisions, and 6 divisions. Have them ready by morning. His staff exchanged doubtful glances, but they obeyed. Meanwhile, Bradley wrestled with his own crisis. As the commander of the 12th Army Group, responsibility for the Ardennes lay squarely on his shoulders. He had relied on flawed intelligence assessments and placed inexperienced divisions in what he thought was a quiet sector. Now Bastogne was becoming a trap, and the 101st Airborne was surrounded, their supplies dwindling. Every hour of delay would cost lives and risk the collapse of the entire front. By the early hours of December 19th, the stage was set. Bastogne's fate, the 101st Airborne's survival, and the credibility of Allied command rested on a single audacious move. Only one man, Patton, could attempt it. Only one army, the 3rd, could execute it. And only one commander, Bradley, would bear the tension of hoping against all odds that his old friend could perform the impossible. Morning arrived in Verdun with a brittle chill that cut through the thick coats of Allied commanders. The conference room, dimly lit and crowded, was alive with the tension of men who knew the world could change in the next few hours. Eisenhower stood at the head of the table, his presence calm but commanding. The situation was urgent. German forces had pushed deep into the Ardennes, units scattered, communications failing, and the 101st Airborne trapped in Bastogne. The maps before them were a mosaic of chaos, red lines slicing through fragile American positions. Bastogne's 7 roads were key, the crossroads of a larger strategy, and if it fell, the German offensive could split the Allies in two. Eisenhower's voice broke the silence. "How soon can you attack north with substantial forces?" The room stiffened. Montgomery leaned back, carefully offering his estimate, 1 week. Other commanders suggested 10 days. Patton rose, his figure cutting a confident silhouette against the cold light streaming through the windows. 48 hours, he said, and the room froze. The words hung in the air, almost impossible, audacious, reckless. British generals exchanged incredulous looks. Bradley stared, incredulous but aware of Patton's uncanny ability to achieve the unthinkable. Patton outlined his plan calmly, almost casually, as if he were discussing a routine exercise. The 4th Armoured Division would lead the spearhead. The 26th and 80th Infantry Divisions would provide flank support. They would pivot the 3rd Army north, covering hundreds of miles through snow and ice, and strike the German flank south of Bastogne. Bradley's mind raced. Every logistical detail, every movement, every coordination of fuel, ammunition, and artillery seemed impossible. Yet Patton spoke with certainty, and certainty in him had always translated into action. Montgomery shook his head, expressing doubts that mirrored the room's unease. 2 weeks, he said, was the minimum required to organize a counter-offensive. Bradley knew he could argue, he could reason, but he also knew the Allies had no time to wait. Eisenhower, weighing the cautious British perspective against American aggressiveness, made the decision. Patton would launch the counterattack from the south, beginning December 22nd. Montgomery would hold the northern line for a later offensive in January. As the commanders left the room, Bradley pulled Patton aside. "George," he said quietly, "you better deliver on this." Patton smiled, the kind of calm confidence that made soldiers trust him beyond reason. "We'll be in Bastogne by Christmas," he replied. The next hours were a blur of activity. Patton's staff coordinated movement orders, calculated supply lines, and ensured that each division understood its role. Engineers marked routes through icy forests. Military police directed convoys of tanks, trucks, and artillery along treacherous roads. Each unit had to move swiftly but maintain combat readiness. Frostbite and exhaustion threatened every soldier, yet the 3rd Army advanced with precision and determination. Bradley monitored every report, disbelief giving way to cautious hope. The impossible was beginning to feel plausible. By the end of the day, all divisions were in motion. The 4th Armoured Division led, crushing through icy roads. Infantry followed, maintaining formation despite blizzards and freezing temperatures. Artillery units repositioned along the northern axis, ensuring fire support would be ready upon arrival. Every mile gained was a small miracle. The audacity of the maneuver, the speed, and the coordination of Patton's forces had set the stage for a showdown that would define the winter of 1944 and the fate of the 101st Airborne. December 22, 1944. The 3rd Army's advance reached its critical point. The 4th Armoured Division spearheaded the attack, grinding forward through narrow, icy roads lined by dense Ardennes forests. Every mile was contested. German forces, anticipating relief efforts, had prepared ambushes along the flanks, fortified villages, and anti-tank obstacles. The roar of Sherman tanks echoed through the valleys as infantrymen slogged through snow, their boots sinking into frozen mud. Artillery units fired relentlessly, displacing to new positions as the spearhead advanced. Every movement was calculated, every formation disciplined, despite the chaos of winter warfare. Bradley watched from Luxembourg, tension pulling at his jaw. He had doubted Patton's promise, but reports from forward observers painted a different reality. Units were moving faster than predicted, communications held. Supply trucks kept pace with the combat elements. It was impossible, yet the Third Army was executing the maneuver with deadly precision. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Williams Abrams, Jr., leading Combat Command B, pushed his tanks relentlessly toward Bastogne. German fire erupted around his column, anti-tank shells smashing into snowbanks, machine gun fire tearing at infantry following in half-tracks. Abrams' men returned fire, moving in small, flexible task forces that combined armor, infantry, and artillery. Each village had to be cleared house by house, street by street. Casualties mounted, yet morale remained high. Soldiers trusted Abrams and their tanks. They knew hesitation would mean annihilation. Meanwhile, the 26th Infantry Division advanced on the left flank, pushing through forested ridges and frozen streams. Soldiers hoisted wounded comrades over snowdrifts and dragged ammunition crates across ice-laden roads. Every obstacle was met with ingenuity. Engineers dismantled fallen trees, patched icy bridges, and laid tracks for tanks to pass. Behind them, the 80th Infantry Division followed, securing supply lines and readying positions for artillery to support the final push toward Bastogne. Bastogne itself remained under siege. The 101st Airborne held fast, their defences tested by relentless German assaults, dwindling supplies and freezing temperatures. Morale was battered but unbroken. MacAuliffe's one-word defiance, nuts, had already become legendary, a symbol of resolve, yet the paratroopers knew relief was their only hope of survival. Rough forests thick with snow and towns pocked with destruction, the Third Army continued its advance. Every tank and infantry column moved with synchronized precision. Bradley's skepticism gradually gave way to astonishment. The audacity, the speed, the cohesion of Patton's army was more than military genius. It was something almost impossible to comprehend. Why nightfall? Patton's forces were within striking distance of Bastogne. The towns surrounding the crossroads were still contested, but American troops pressed forward relentlessly. The roar of engines, the crackle of gunfire, and the pounding of artillery created a symphony of war that drove the German defenders back. Every report reaching Bradley's headquarters told the same story. The Third Army, turned 90 degrees from its original objective, was on schedule, executing a maneuver that few believed possible. That frozen night, as the 1st and 3rd Armoured Spearheads drew closer to Bastogne, the culmination of planning, audacity, and relentless discipline coalesced. The stage was set for the relief of the 101st Airborne, a moment that would test courage, endurance, and leadership to the absolute limit. The impossible was about to become history. December 23, 1944. Bastogne, the 101st Airborne, had held the crossroads for nearly a week. Snow piled against barricades, frozen rations ran low, and wounded men waited hours for medical attention. Every street, every building, every alley had been turned into a fortress. German 4 CES pressed the siege relentlessly, probing weak points, launching artillery strikes and sending armoured patrols to test the paratroopers' resolve. The defenders were exhausted, hungry, and wounded, yet their spirit remained unbroken. MacAuliffe walked among his men, offering words of encouragement, checking barricades, and delivering rations wherever he could. Every glance told the soldiers one thing: hold the line no matter what. Outside Bastogne, the Third Army pushed relentlessly northward. The 4th Armoured Division led the charge, spearheading the relief effort. Sherman tanks moved over icy roads, their engines groaning under the strain of snow and ice. Infantry followed in half-tracks, their boots crunching through frozen mud and debris. Artillery units moved with precision, preparing to unleash barrages on German positions to clear paths for the advancing armour. Engineers worked feverishly, repairing bridges, clearing obstacles, and marking routes through dense forests. The coordination was flawless, executed under conditions that would have frozen any lesser army in its tracks. Weather was merciless. Blizzards reduced visibility to mere yards, and ice-slicked roads slowed even the fastest tanks. Supply trucks struggled to keep pace, and fuel shortages threatened to stall the advance. Yet every unit pressed on. The rhythm of movement became almost mechanical. Tanks advance, infantry secures flanks, engineers clear obstacles, artillery fires on call. The Germans, despite their fortified positions, were caught off guard by the speed and audacity of Patton's army. Inside Bastogne, the paratroopers felt a shift in the air. Rumours spread, tanks had been sighted moving toward the south. Relief was coming. Hope, fragile and flickering, sparked among the men. MacAuliffe reminded them to stay vigilant, to keep firing, to hold every building. The Germans sensed the shift too. They intensified attacks on the southern approaches, desperate to prevent the relief from reaching the surrounded town. Every street became a battlefield, every rooftop a sniper's perch. By the afternoon, Combat Command B under Lieutenant Colonel Abrams had pushed through German lines south of Bastogne. Infantry cleared buildings, tanks rolled over icy streets, and artillery targeted entrenched positions. The column moved as one, disciplined, precise, and relentless. German resistance stiffened but could not withstand the coordinated assault. The paratroopers heard the distant roar of tanks, the unmistakable sound of Sherman engines, and the clatter of infantry advancing. They knew the siege would soon be broken. Bradley, monitoring every report from Luxembourg, felt a mixture of disbelief and awe. Patton had delivered what seemed impossible. The Third Army had turned north, fought through prepared defences, navigated a logistical nightmare, and reached striking distance of Bastogne faster than anyone believed possible. Every commander in the room knew history was being made. The 101st would survive, the crossroads would be held, and the audacity of Patton's plan was proving itself in real time. By nightfall, the first tanks of Abrams' task force rumbled into the outskirts of Bastogne, their presence a tangible promise to the besieged paratroopers. The impossible maneuver, executed under the worst conditions imaginable, was about to reach its defining moment. Relief had arrived. December 24, 1944. Bastogne. The first tanks of the 4th Armoured Division rolled through the snow-choked streets, breaking the siege that had gripped the 101st Airborne for 7 harrowing days. Soldiers of the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion rushed forward to greet the advancing column, waving orange panels and signalling recognition. Relief had arrived, but the fight was far from over. German forces still occupied key buildings, snipers perched in rooftops, and artillery fire intermittently tore through barricades. Every inch gained demanded courage, precision, and coordination. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams orchestrated the final push with meticulous care. Tanks advanced in coordinated waves, infantry cleared houses methodically, and engineers dismantled remaining obstacles in the streets. The paratroopers joined the assault wherever needed, reinforcing the southern perimeter and integrating with the armoured spearhead. Ammunition and rations were distributed immediately, stabilizing morale that had been stretched thin by days of siege. Medical units evacuated the wounded, treating frostbite and battle injuries under the relentless winter sky. The Germans, caught off guard by the speed and audacity of Patton's maneuver, scrambled to respond. Counterattacks were mounted, but met with disciplined fire from combined American forces. Artillery struck fortified positions, while tanks and infantry pressed relentlessly. Villages once held by the enemy were systematically cleared, roadblocks dismantled, and critical crossroads secured. Each victory brought the paratroopers and the Third Army closer together, physically and symbolically. Bastogne's relief was not merely tactical, it was a testament to coordination, planning, and audacity. In headquarters, Bradley received updates in near real time. Reports indicated that the 4th Armoured had linked with paratroopers, the 26th Infantry secured flanks, and the 80th Infantry maintained supply routes. Bradley's disbelief slowly transformed into admiration. Patton had achieved more than a rapid advance. He had preserved combat effectiveness, maintained cohesion, and executed a maneuver that most military minds had deemed impossible. He picked up the phone and called Patton. "George, congratulations. You die. It." Patton's reply was characteristically modest. The 101st didn't need rescuing. They were doing fine. We just opened the door so they could continue the fight. Within Bastogne, soldiers felt the psychological weight lift. The knowledge that reinforcements had arrived reignited determination. Units reorganized, medical teams reached wounded soldiers, and supply chains were re-established. The relief did not end combat, but it restored the ability to fight effectively. Morale, strained under days of encirclement and scarcity, soared. The paratroopers had survived, and the Third Army's maneuver had validated their resilience and courage. The broader impact was immediate. German commanders were forced to divert resources to counter the relief, weakening their main offensive. Patton's audacity disrupted the timing and momentum of the German advance, buying precious hours for the Allies to consolidate positions, prepare defences, and plan counterattacks. Strategically, the relief of Bastogne preserved a critical junction, slowed the German offensive, and demonstrated the ability of American forces to respond rapidly under extreme conditions. By Christmas Eve, the 101st Airborne held Bastogne firmly, supported by Third Army forces in position to repel further assaults. Bradley reflected on the operation, realizing that Patton's unique combination of speed, decisiveness, and audacity had not only saved Bastogne, but also altered the course of the Battle of the Bulge. The impossible had been made real, and American forces had proven that coordination, courage, and bold leadership could overcome overwhelming odds. December 25, 1944. Bastogne. Christmas morning dawned over a town still scarred by battle, the streets littered with debris, broken vehicles, and snow-stained red from the week's relentless fighting. The 101st Airborne, reinforced by Patton's Third Army, now stood firmly on the perimeter, but the German forces were far from defeated. Across the surrounding hills and forests, pockets of resistance remained, entrenched machine gun nests, sniper positions, and hidden artillery awaiting the moment to strike back. The battle was far from over, the siege had been broken, but the fight for Bastogne was entering its deadliest phase. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams prepared his Combat Command B for a decisive push to clear the remaining German positions south and southwest of the town. Tanks rumbled through narrow streets, their engines thrumming like relentless war drums. Infantry followed in half-tracks, moving from building to building, clearing German snipers and strongpoints. Artillery barrages struck with precision, shattering fortified positions and softening resistance before infantry advances. Every maneuver had to be exact. Any misstep could allow the Germans to regroup and threaten the town again. Inside Bastogne, paratroopers reinforced barricades, distributed ammunition, and coordinated with advancing armor. McAuliffe moved from sector to sector, assessing defenses and encouraging his men. The one-word defiance that had become legendary, nuts, now symbolized the unyielding spirit of the defenders as they prepared to fight side by side with the relieving forces. The paratroopers understood that this final push would determine not only the fate of Bastogne but the morale of the entire Allied front in the Ardennes. Germans, sensing their precarious position, launched a desperate counterattack. Tanks emerged from concealed roads, infantry surged through snow-laden woods, and artillery struck at American positions with lethal precision. Abrams' task force met them head-on. Tanks fired on the move, infantry cleared every house, and engineers removed obstacles under heavy fire. The streets became a deadly chessboard, with each square contested inch by inch. Explosions echoed through the town, smoke and flame mixing with the frigid air, creating a surreal battlefield illuminated by fire and destruction. As the hours passed, American forces began to turn the tide decisively. German defences crumbled under coordinated assaults, tanks breached fortified positions, and paratroopers secured the key intersections that controlled movement around Bastogne. Every advance was a calculated risk, every street taken a victory against an enemy desperate to hold their last positions. Soldiers fought through exhaustion, cold, and fear, driven by training, leadership, and sheer determination. Bradley, observing from Luxembourg, received the reports with a mixture of relief and awe. Patton had not only broken through but was now consolidating Bastogne with relentless precision. The Third Army had executed a maneuver few believed possible, maintaining combat effectiveness while striking decisively at entrenched enemy forces. The strategic significance was enormous. Bastogne remained in Allied hands, the German offensive disrupted, and the morale of American forces bolstered. By nightfall, Bastogne was largely secured. German forces were in full retreat from the southern approaches, and American troops held key positions around the town. The siege had ended, but the price had been high. Streets bore the scars of relentless fighting, buildings were shattered, and soldiers were exhausted beyond measure. Yet the victory was undeniable. Through audacity, leadership, and unyielding courage, the 101st Airborne had been reinforced, the town saved, and the momentum of the German offensive irrevocably broken. December 26, 1944, Bastogne. Dawn broke over a town that had endured a week of relentless combat, snow still thick on rooftops and streets, frozen mud mixed with blood and debris. The relief had arrived, but the battle was not yet over. German forces, though weakened, had regrouped to the north and west, attempting small counterattacks to reclaim lost ground. Patton's Third Army had turned the tide, yet every commander knew that maintaining control over Bastogne required constant vigilance and coordinated effort. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams continued to direct Combat Command B, leading the final push to secure the southern approaches completely. Tanks and infantry moved in synchrony, clearing remaining pockets of resistance, while engineers dismantled obstacles and repaired roads to allow the steady flow of supplies. Artillery fired relentlessly, suppressing German positions and forcing defenders from fortified buildings. The roar of engines, the crackle of gunfire, and the rumble of explosions formed a chaotic symphony of war. But through it, discipline and coordination prevailed. Inside Bastogne, the 101st Airborne consolidated positions. Soldiers reinforced barricades, treated the wounded, and redistributed ammunition. Morale surged as the paratroopers realized that the relief had not only arrived, but was actively pushing the enemy back. McAuliffe moved through the ranks, ensuring lines remained solid, encouraging exhausted men, and coordinating with the arriving armored units. The paratroopers were no longer fighting in isolation, they were part of a combined force that now dominated the battlefield. Germans launched sporadic counterattacks, desperate to test the American hold. Infantry infiltrated through woods, tanks probed the flanks, and artillery shelled key intersections. Each attack was met with disciplined fire from the paratroopers and advancing armored divisions. Sherman tanks moved methodically through narrow streets, infantry cleared buildings, and engineers neutralized obstacles under heavy fire. Every advance, every defensive maneuver demonstrated the effective ease of combined arms and the coordination that Patton had imposed on his army. Bradley, observing from Luxembourg, continued to follow reports with a mixture of awe and relief. The Third Army had executed a maneuver that defied conventional military wisdom, turning an entire army 90 degrees, advancing through the worst winter in decades, and relieving a surrounded garrison was an achievement few thought possible. Yet Patton had done exactly that, maintaining unit cohesion, supply lines, and combat readiness throughout the operation. The strategic consequences were immediate. German forces were weakened, their offensive momentum slowed, and Bastogne remained firmly in Allied hands. As afternoon fell, Abrams's units secured the last southern villages, linking with paratrooper positions inside Bastogne. Roads reopened, supply convoys moved freely, and artillery units were repositioned for long-range support. Communication lines stabilized, allowing coordination with other Allied forces preparing to counterattack the bulge from multiple directions. Soldiers, exhausted and cold, took brief moments to acknowledge the gravity of what they had accomplished. They had not only survived, they had pushed back the enemy and restored the initiative to the Allies. By evening, Bastogne stood as a symbol of resilience, coordination, and courage. The 101st Airborne, reinforced and rearmed, was ready to continue the fight. Patton's audacity had not only saved the town but had demonstrated the power of rapid maneuver, decisive leadership, and the will to act when others hesitated. Bradley, reflecting on the reports and eyewitness accounts, could not conceal his admiration. The relief of Bastogne had been more than a military victory. It was a statement of American resolve and the audacious genius of one of its greatest commanders. December 27, 1944. Bastogne. The town was battered, but intact. A testament to the unyielding spirit of the 101st Airborne and the audacious maneuvering of Patton's Third Army. Soldiers moved cautiously through streets still scarred by battle, clearing debris, tending the wounded, and reorganizing supply lines. Every corner held the echoes of firefights, every building bore the marks of combat. Yet amidst the destruction, there was a sense of triumph, a hard-won victory forged through courage, discipline, and decisive leadership. Patton inspected the town personally, moving from sector to sector alongside paratroopers and armored units. He offered guidance, encouragement, and words of recognition, acknowledging the paratroopers' resilience while ensuring that the Third Army's forces were positioned to repel any remaining German counterattacks. The integration of armored divisions with entrenched infantry was seamless, a result of meticulous planning and relentless execution over the past week. Inside headquarters, Bradley studied the final reports. The numbers spoke volumes. Bastogne had been held, German forces had been pushed back, and the southern approaches were secure. The Third Army had executed an almost impossible maneuver, pivoting hundreds of thousands of troops 90 degrees in winter conditions while maintaining full combat effectiveness. Bradley reflected on the broader significance. Patton had not only relieved a besieged garrison, he had disrupted the German offensive, restored Allied initiative, and demonstrated the capacity for rapid, decisive action under pressure. The morale boost was immediate and profound. Paratroopers, once isolated and running low on supplies, now felt the presence of reinforcements and the reassurance of strategic support. Soldiers shared stories of tank columns breaking through German lines, of house-to-house clearing under freezing temperatures, and of the relentless advance had finally reached Bastogne. The audacity of the Third Army had inspired confidence across the front, proving that even in the most desperate situations, bold and decisive leadership could alter the course of events. Strategically, the relief of Bastogne had ripple effects across the Ardennes. German commanders were forced to divert troops to contain the American advance, weakening their offensive elsewhere. The momentum of the German attack faltered, allowing Allied forces to regroup, stabilize their lines, and prepare counter-offensives that would eventually eliminate the bulge. The operation validated Patton's philosophy, speed, audacity, and initiative often outweighed caution and deliberation. Bradley personally called Patton. "George, congratulations. You did it," he said. Patton's characteristic modesty came through. The 101st didn't need rescuing. They were doing fine. We just opened the door so they could continue the fight. The exchange captured the mutual respect between two commanders of differing styles. Bradley measured and methodical, Patton aggressive and audacious. Yet in Bastogne, their cooperation had produced one of the most remarkable operations of the war. By nightfall, Bastogne was secure, supply lines were restored, and the 101st Airborne was reinforced, ready for future operations. Soldiers rested briefly, cleaned their weapons, and tended to the wounded, knowing that the immediate threat had passed. The relief had demonstrated the effectiveness of combined arms, the importance of initiative, and the extraordinary resilience of American forces under extreme conditions. For Bradley, the event was more than a military success. It was a moment of professional and personal validation. Patton had performed the impossible, and the 101st Airborne had held against overwhelming odds. The Battle of Bastogne would be remembered not only for its intensity, but for the audacity, coordination, and courage that had defined the relief operation. The impact would echo across the Ardennes and be studied by military historians for generations. January 1945. Bastogne. The snow had begun to melt, revealing the scars of battle, shattered buildings, cratered streets, and frozen remnants of war. The siege had ended, the 101st Airborne reinforced, and Patton's Third Army had demonstrated an audacity that would be remembered for generations. Yet the cost had been high. Soldiers were exhausted, wounded, and forever changed by the relentless fighting. The German offensive in the Ardennes had stalled. Their momentum broken, they were forced to retreat, leaving behind a battlefield that told a story of resilience and rapid decision-making. Allied forces consolidated positions, tended to the wounded, and prepared for the continuing push into Germany. Bastogne had survived, but its survival was more than tactical. It was symbolic. The town represented courage, determination, and the power of audacity in the face of overwhelming odds. Bradley reflected on the operation with profound admiration. Patton had done the impossible, turned an entire army, moved it across harsh winter terrain, and relieved a besieged garrison in record time. The coordination, discipline, and sheer willpower displayed had altered the course of the Battle of the Bulge. The 101st Airborne had held, the town had been saved, and the German offensive had been blunted. History had been written in the snow, one bold maneuver at a time. For the soldiers, Bastogne became more than a battle. It became a testament to courage, leadership, and perseverance. Letters home told stories of tanks cutting through snow, paratroopers defending streets against impossible odds, and commanders like Patton and Abrams leading with audacity. Generations of military leaders would study the Leaf of Bastogne as a masterclass in speed, initiative, and the power of unrelenting resolve. Bastogne stood as a symbol of American grit. The 101st Airborne's defiance, Patton's audacity, and Bradley's strategic foresight combined to create a story that would endure long after the snow had melted. A story of hope, courage, and the relentless pursuit of victory.